During my childhood, we had a really creepy neighbor, who I'll call Dave. My family wasn't wealthy, to say the least. My mom relied solely on child support from my father, so we grew up in a pretty sketchy part of town. My mom did her best though, and we had a pretty happy childhood from what I can remember. My mom always warned us to stay away from our creepy neighbor Dave, and at the time, I wasn't really sure why. He was a quiet guy and didn't really go out much. But when he passed by, he would always offer us cookies or other baked treats that he bought from the store. Since my siblings and I were just kids, we really didn't see what all the fuss was about. But we did note that he often smelled bad. One time, my siblings and I were playing basketball outside in our front yard. Dave approached us with that same smile and gave us each a cookie. Then, he invited us all back to his place. He claimed he had more treats and would give them to us if we followed him inside. We all agreed and followed the man to his doorstep. We stopped on the front porch and waited for him to bring the treats, but he stopped at the door and told us to come inside. His place smelled horrible, so we were hesitant to follow him in there, but he insisted that we needed to come with him. Just as we were about to follow him in the house, my mom came outside and yelled for us to come in. We weren't sure what we did wrong at the time. My mom gave us a huge lecture about stranger danger and how we must never enter strangers' homes. There were other instances like this too, where Dave would use something of value to try and lure us kids into his house. But thankfully, we always listened to our mother and never went with him. Although the man was creepy, he never did anything that confirmed my mother's suspicions. At least, not that we knew of at the time. Fast forward to a week ago. I'm an adult now, in my late 30s. I came across an article about a man who was recently arrested on multiple counts of murder. The police had gotten a search warrant for the man's home, and several bodies of children were discovered in the man's basement. The man in this article was Dave. The home that the police searched was the same house he had lived in all those years ago, the one right next to our childhood home. I'm a college student, and I recently moved out of my parents' place and into an apartment complex right by my school. The apartment complex itself is pretty small and not the most well kept, but it's all I can really afford right now. There are 12 units in total, and most of the residents inside are older individuals. I moved in just last week, and so far, it has not been going well. There's one unit that's directly beside mine, and the man living there is starting to creep me out. At night, I hear him moaning through the walls. I'll be woken up at 3 a.m. to the sounds of him wailing for seemingly no reason. The first night it happened, I went to his door to politely ask him to stop. As I entered the hallway, the wailing became louder. I hesitantly knocked on the door. When I did, the wailing stopped. After a few seconds, the man slowly opened the door. He opened it just slightly and peeked out at me. He looked dirty and exhausted. He didn't say anything either. I broke the silence by saying, "Hey, can you keep it down?" He nodded and slammed the door. He didn't make any noise for the rest of the night, and I was able to get a decent night's sleep. This cycle continued for the next 3 nights. I would wake up to him wailing and ask him to keep it down. Then he'd stop for the rest of the night. This is when I got the idea to start falling asleep with movies playing to hopefully drown out the sound of the wailing. This worked, and the next few nights I was able to sleep without being interrupted. This is where things really started to go downhill. A few nights ago, I woke up in the middle of the night to a very loud knock on the door. I wasn't sure why someone would be at my door at this hour. I looked through the peephole and saw that it was my creepy neighbor. I opened the door and said, "Hello? Is everything all right?" That's when he stared at me, dead in the face, and said, "Can you keep it down?" I was obviously confused and said, "Yeah, sorry," and just shut the door. I wasn't sure what he meant by it, and I was clearly making no noise at all. But I thought he might have been talking about the TV, so I shut it off and went to sleep. The next night, I decided to wear earphones so that the sound of my TV wouldn't bother him. But still, I woke up to a loud knock at the door. I checked the peephole, and sure enough, it was the neighbor. I decided to ignore him this time and hoped he would go away. This continued for 2 more nights. Just this morning, however, I left my apartment to head to school. When I turned to lock my door, I noticed that there were scratches in my door. The scratches spelled out, "Can you keep it down?" I packed up my things after school today, and I'm currently staying with my parents. My neighbor is clearly unwell, and I'm terrified of what he's capable of. I'm going to be looking for other apartments, and I will not be going back there alone anytime soon. I've had this home for about 2 years now. It's a nice property right in the forest, so there aren't many houses or people nearby. The closest neighbor is a roughly 5-minute walk from my place, but the new guy who just moved into the house next to mine is sketchy, to say the least. Around the time he moved in, I started to notice things around my property going missing. It started with small things. The first thing that went missing was my bird feeder. Thought that maybe a larger animal had taken it, so I brushed it off. But then I noticed my shovel went missing too. Then, my lawn chair. I was already suspicious of my new neighbor at this point, so I decided to walk over to his place and investigate. There weren't any cars in the driveway, so I assumed he wasn't home. I went over to his backyard, and sure enough, all of my stolen items were there. The man didn't even try to hide them. I started moving all of my things back onto my property, and this time I put them inside my house so that they couldn't be stolen again. Once I had finished up, my neighbor still wasn't home, so I headed to work. I planned to confront him afterwards. I finished up my work and arrived home at around 7 p.m. When I pulled into my driveway, I saw my neighbor standing in front of my house holding a baseball bat. I stayed in my car so that I could make a quick getaway if things turned sour. I rolled down my window and said, "Can I help you?" The man looked angry. He stood there for a moment. Then, he snapped. He started screaming at me, accusing me of stealing his stuff. This guy was really accusing me of stealing all my own stuff. I was very pissed off at this point. We argued back and forth for about 5 minutes, and then he ran straight for my car. He hit my car with his bat. I instantly reversed out of there and drove straight to the police station. I reported everything, and the police went over to talk to my neighbor and try to calm him down, but there wasn't much they could do, since there wasn't really evidence about the stealing, so they suggested I install cameras in case he tried it again. I got some cameras installed the next day, and so far, my neighbor hasn't bothered me since. I think me getting the police involved scared him a little, but I'm convinced that he's going to pull something any minute now. I feel very uneasy living next to him, but I hope that this was the last of it.